is lecture 12 of the learning about learning lecture series, and so far we have talked about reinforcement learning in the lecture 11, and particularly we were talking about Primack's principle and its modification by Overland and Timberlake on response deprivation aspects of that, right. So, we said we took the example of an different sets of reinforcers, ice creams, potatoes and spinach, and we said Primack's, according to Primack, you should be able to modulate the response for the spinach by offering ice cream a higher responsive stimuli and saying that, hey, look, if you consume more of spinach, I would be able to I will be offering you ice cream. So, that should clearly increase the response of the spinach, but the conorandum that we posed and then we try to overcome that using the response deprivation theory is that if that is true, is it possible that in by some means we can make the people eat more ice cream by offering eat more potatoes by offering ice cream. See, remember, ice cream is the highest in our classification. Ice cream was the highest rewarding stimuli and then followed by potato and spinach. So, it is natural to assume that you can use the highest to modulate the lower, but the question that they were trying to ask is, by some means can we actually make them make the lower responsive stimuli, in this case potatoes, be rewarding while the natural thing itself is eating the ice cream, right. So, for in reality it turns out you can actually do that. You can actually offer people certain amount of potatoes and then ask them and tell them, hey, look, if you actually eat more, if you actually eat more ice cream, I would offer more potatoes. People would do that. People would increase their intake of ice cream for the offer of potatoes, not just like that. So, the way you explain that is through response deprivation, wherein you say that there is a basal level of response, there is a basal level of likeliness that each of us have towards these food varieties, and if you actually deprive the person of that likeliness, like say in the measure that we have illustrated, we said 6, 3 and 1. So, if I were to deprive the likeliness of the potato by some means to only 1, I give you only 1 amount of potato, then you would have that deprivation. In order to overcome that deprivation, you would want to eat more potatoes. In that circumstance, I can go ahead and say, hey, look, I would offer you more potatoes only if you eat more ice creams, then you will adjust your likeliness of ice cream to, or increase your likeliness of ice cream a little bit more and then eat more ice creams in the expectation of getting potatoes, even though potatoes to start with is less preferred. There was also an example of how we can use that to in a classroom scenario to modulate the behavior. We did both of that and then emphasize the fact that in order to understand this, we need to take a closer look at the stimulus response outcome behavior itself, that is different from Pavlovian conditioning, all right. So, now in this lecture what I am going to do is that I am going to talk to you in detail about how the reinforcement learning per se is further classified, and just for the clarity sake we will be able to follow it easily and be able to understand the intricacies associated with them, and then dwell upon the fact that when we have talked about what kind of reinforcements can be used in examples, but in a more organized manner, how do you think about these reinforcers and what are all the factors that can actually change this reinforcement, all right. So, let us start with the idea of the reinforcement learning and then their categories themselves. So, reinforcement learning or the instrumental conditioning, as say, we can think of that as consisting of two big classes. One, the reinforcement learning, and two is the punishment learning, all right. So, the operant conditioning, the bigger class. So, reinforcement learning is a part of a bigger class called operant conditioning, which we know is different from the classical conditioning here, right. The difference is you would have an outcome only and only if the animal responds to a stimuli. Okay. If the animal does not respond, then there is no possibility of an outcome. The fact that there is a response does not necessarily mean you will have an outcome, but for sure it is true if you do not respond there is no outcome. So, that is the difference, that is a key difference, and that is that separates the classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Once you make that distinction clear, then we are talking about the subclass of operant conditioning, in which you have a reinforcement learning, that is one part, and then the punishment learning here, all right. So, that is the part that we talked about, reinforcement learning. As the name implies here, the outcome is a favorable behavior for that animal. So, it is a reinforcing, so to say, it is going to encourage the stimulus response associative strength or the associativity. So, that is why it is called as a reinforcement. On the other hand, punishment is going to reduce the response of the or the association of the stimulus and the response. I mean, I should not say the associative strength here, but I should say it is going to both of them are going to modulate the response values. One is going to increase the response, you call it as reinforcement, other is going to reduce the response, you call it as punishment. Okay. A very simple example here is Pavlov's dog's experiment of a bell, provided we say that okay, in response to a bell the dog has to press a lever, okay. Then I am going to give a food. Now, food is going to reinforce this behavior of pressing the lever in response to the light. So, that is reinforcement learning. On the other hand, I can say I will take a rat or a mice or even a dog, and in response to a stimuli, right, I am going to present in response to a stimuli dog, if it does not do anything, I am going to present a little shock, foot shock, right. Remember our shuttle box training. So, in there we are going to present a simple foot shock here. So, if you do the foot shock, then the dog has to respond, not responding is not an answer there, and that again would come under operant conditioning. You are responding to a stimulus, but it would be coming under a class of reinforcement learning. You call it as negative reinforcement, meaning let us say if there is a disturbing noise that is continuously present all throughout, and that is present all throughout, right. In response to a stimuli, if you are actually taking away that disturbing noise, then that would classify into a negative reinforcement. Okay. On the other hand, punishment here is you have a stimuli, the dog responds, for that response you are actually providing a shock. So, then you are actually talking about a positive punishment, I mean the punishment is being presented to it. So, that it is going to reduce its response, in reduction of the response defines it to be a positive punishment. Okay. So, the reinforcement and punishment of positive and negative is defined in terms of how the magnitude of the response changes. If the response were to change to increase the magnitude, you call it as reinforcement. If the magnitude goes down, you call it as punishment. That is true for both positive and negative. Clearly, when the dog responds to a stimuli by pressing a lever and you are delivering a shock, you are going to reduce its probability of response later on. So, it is a positive punishment, you are actually punishing the dog for the stimuli, wherein normally it would have gotten a shock, but because of this response, right, again the shuttle box training, where if it were to jump, right, in response to a tone or within a certain time period, you take away the shocks for some period of time, right. You are actually increasing that, you are actually making the dog to perform this more and more. So, that you can develop this behavior, that is, you present a stimuli, the dog is going to respond more to avoid a punishment, right. So, that is a positive change in the magnitude of the response. So, you call it as negative reinforcement. Again, two kinds of learning, reinforcement learning and punishment learning. The reinforcement and punishment is totally determined by the nature of the outcome that we are going to present. If it is a favorable one, you call it as reinforcement. If it is a unfavorable one, you call it as punishment. The idea of me classifying these is to say that when you are talking about reinforcement learning or on operant conditioning, you can say, hey, what if I were to do this or do that and stuff like that, but any of that you are talking about, any variant that you can think of in terms of the relationship between the outcome and the response, the nature of that relevant as it pertains to the animal will fall under one of these 4 categories. Once you say that this is one of this category, rest of it is exactly the same. You take one category and then rest of the analysis that we are going to talk about and rest of the analysis we are going to deal with is exactly the same, except you are going to say the sign of the magnitude is going to change and the nature of the outcome will be different, that is all, but the general philosophy will remain exactly the same. So, now what is this general philosophy? The general philosophy comes to the point of knowing what are all the what are all the stimuli that can act as the reinforcers themselves. Remember, the whole idea of this we got into, but to understand what are all the factors and what are all the different ways the animal can learn, right. One and if there are different multiple ways of exhibiting learning, and then you want to ask what are all the factors that can bias the learning towards one way or the other, and in doing so then you are boiling it down to understanding the nature of the outcome itself, nature of the in the stimulus response outcome curve, nature of the outcome itself, how can it bias the learning or does it even bias the learning. So, in order to understand that, we first need to understand what are all the stimuli that can be used as the reinforcers. Primack clearly said you can use you can look at the behavior and classify them as more favorable, less favorable and so on and so forth, but in a more organized fashion if you are to look at it, you would think of the reinforcers as primary reinforcers and secondary reinforcers, and what we are going to talk about now is about secondary reinforcers. In this context, it is important to get the notion of an important way of conditioning an animal or in developing a conditioning to a stimuli is called as a second order conditioning. So far whatever we have seen has to do with what we call it as first order conditioning, where you are taking a stimuli, let us say CS1, and then you pair it with a US, like for example a food, and the idea here is you develop the animal develops an association and thereby develops this response. Later on if you just present the CS1, you are able to elicit a response, it is a CR. Okay. So, now the CR is developed in you can think of that as an expectancy of a reward or it is a reward response. I would like to call it as a reward response, not to confuse with the fact that you are providing a reward, it is the response exhibited by the animal, okay, that is acquired through reward learning. Okay. That is what I mean by CR, which is equivalent to a reward. This could be just a simple salivation. Okay. So, that is our reward response in this case. Now, in this condition it is very simple to say that okay, look, I am going to use the food as my outcome, right, in our stimulus response outcome, and I use it as a positive reinforce and increase or develop a new habit. Very good. But evolutionarily it turns out having few of such these are called the primary response primary reinforcers, very analogous to Pavlov's US, right, the native responses. It is good to have them, no doubt about it, and they are there, but if only they were to be there, then it severely restricts the animal's ability to moderate its behavior. So, it turns out the animal can actually form a higher order association. What do I mean by higher order association? Having learned that the CS1 can to the point where the CS1 can by itself elicit a response, you can take this CS1 and then pair it with another CS, a new CS here. Okay. This is the same CS which has developed a response. Now, you pair it with another CS, new CS, such that now the animal can actually elicit another response, could maybe same, maybe different, but it can elicit another response. This again will be a reward response, that is the key here. So, we used the reward response, that is acquired after the presentation of the CS and US to form another response for a different stimuli, altogether a different stimuli, again a reward response. Now, what use is this? I mean, it is good to talk in terms of CS1, CS2 and all that, but what practical value does it have? I said it is evolutionarily important and so on and so forth. Now, what practical value it has even evolutionarily, right? Let us say I switch the name of CS1 to a token, all right. So, let us say if you had to give me a token, I am going to give you a food. Now, what is going to happen is that the token itself later on is going to develop a notion of a reward, feeling of a reward, right. If you get a token, it is equivalent to getting a food, right, you will develop that reward, and in fact that happens because of this association, all right. So, you can take something else, some other stimuli, and again that could be another token, thereby making, I mean this is a reward, this itself is eliciting a reward, right. So, you could this token is actually, you can think of this as a response elicited by the token. So, now this CS2 acquires a new meaning in terms of the reward itself. In fact, the token here I am talking about could be just money or currency, all right. So, at some point in time the money here was needed for you to buy the food, but later on you develop an association, you can develop an association wherein I do not have to present the food at all anymore to you, I can actually give you, take a completely new stimulus and then pair it with a token, right, the reward eliciting token, right, it is like money here, right. So, pair it with that token, now the CS2 itself, okay, would develop a response which is a reward response. Again this itself can again act as another proxy for the token. So, there are several proxies for the token here, CS1 and CS2 now, but the bottom line is the token can act as a proxy for the food. Now, this conditioning is called as second order conditioning, and the reinforcers such as this token, right, the CS1 token, are these reinforcers are called the secondary reinforcers, and they are very very important. As you can see, money is important, and that is how you develop a value to that money or a currency. As a child you do not have much value to that, right. Over a period of time you develop that association only through this kind of second order conditioning. So, now you can clearly see this kind of a situation allows in a natural while too. The money is a civilized phenomena that happened because of civilization, but you can think in terms of in the natural wild, it can actually provide a very valuable way of expanding its repertoire, I mean for changing its modifying its behavior. And in fact, people have tested this in one of the famous experiments by Wolf and co-workers. What they have done is that they have trained the chimpanzees to elicit on a vending machine, where you actually the chimpanzee drops in a token, it gets a grapes, and it's food deprived, so it likes to get the grapes and eat the grapes too. So, in such a case, the token itself is being associated with the food. Then what they do is that they present a lever which is hard to operate, and when you and then when the animal operates the lever, you get a token. What they show is that the chimpanzees would work almost the same, or in fact even more on the lever when you are presenting the grape or these tokens. The moment you learn, you make the chimpanzee learn that tokens can give you grapes. And what more interesting, even more interesting is that the dominant male would like to snatch the coins from the other chimpanzees when they are actually working together. This is not thought, it is actually in there and it is coming out. So, such is the importance of the secondary second order conditioning and the development of secondary reinforcers. And as an experimenter, what it allows us to do is that gives us immense flexibility in terms of how we use these reinforcements and what we use as the reinforcers. Apart from this, while I mean Skinner is the kind of the torchbearer for doing the studies that I am going to talk about later, and also much of these studies. So, while he was a graduate student and he is actually doing this experiment, it turns out that like any graduate student, he works really hard. He works the weekdays, weekends, and every hour, every minute. So, he did not want to waste any time. So, in one such instance, he is working on a weekend and then suddenly realize that he is running out of pellets, food pellets to be used for the training. There he decides to offer the animals this reward, not for every response of the click, but like say every 10 response. Thereby he discovers a plethora of findings that warranted actually a separate book. What he discovered was the effect of scheduling the reinforcement. So far what we have said is that whenever we can use different kind of reinforcers, and when we use the primary reinforcers, we have always been using it in a contingent manner, right. That is, whenever there is a response, you are presenting it, no doubt about it. That by itself gives some contingency, but you can also do this contingency. Remember, go back to our discussions about Rescorla-Wagner. You can also have this contingency without having a continuity, right. You can have breaks in the continuity, you do not and still be contingent. Contingency is about predictability, right. Whenever you are having the response, the likelihood that you are going to have the food, you can have the likelihood being high and consistent without having to give the food at every response, and that is exactly what Skinner did, right. So, when he did that, he realized depending on how you vary this contiguity, he called it as partial reinforcement as against the continuous reinforcement, you can have a different kind of paradigms. 4 of them I am naming, one is which are the dominant ones, we will be discussing about them. So, I am naming them here, listing them here, just a fixed ratio presentation, variable ratio presentation, fixed interval presentation, or variable interval presentation. It is also called fixed ratio scheduling, variable ratio scheduling, fixed interval scheduling, or variable interval scheduling. Now, what are all these things? Fixed ratio, as the name would imply, Skinner would reward the animal for after a fixed amount of responses have elapsed. So, if the animal has responded some x number of times since the last reinforcement, he would set that ratio for the x amount of time no reward. I am going to he would set that fraction x by total number of stimuli, total number of responses he is expecting. So, as long as that x number has happened, he is going to give the reward. Until that x number happens, no reward. So, that is called as a fixed ratio. So, you realize that here time does not have much sense here, because the animal could take it eternity to respond to that number. Until it responds to that, there is no presentation of the food. The variable ratio is a little bit tricky, where he would say it is not a fixed number every time. I am going to change, I am going to vary it around a mean. So, he is going to he will determine that x number, right, once every 10 times or once every 100 times. He will determine that number. About that mean, he will generate the random numbers, and then he will pick this random numbers, and then he will try to match for every. So, now I have presented this reinforcement, next my random number is this, he would wait till that point, then present that reinforcement. When you do it that way, you call it as variable ratio presentation or variable ratio scheduling. Here again, time per se does not matter, right. You have to wait till that particular presentation or that particular expression of the response number has happened. So, as against these, where you are actually counting the response in some sense, these are about time, elapsed time, time that has elapsed since my last reception of the food or the reinforcement. If I were to present at a fixed interval, what we would do is that you would fix a time t, and after this time t you are going to provide this reinforcement. However, you have to understand, in order to get that reinforcement at that instance and later on, the animal has to respond. That is, let me repeat it again. So, the experiment starts here, all right, and we are following in time. Okay. What this fixed interval means is that you are determining. So, this is the instance, this is the first instance, let us say at first instance where we have reinforced, there is food. From this time until some time tau, that is our fixed interval, right. There will no matter how many times the animal responds, there is no food, there is no reward. You would the reinforcement will become ready, in other words, at time t equal to tau, and later on for all time t greater than tau, the reinforcement will be ready for the animal to perform the response and get that. Okay. Until then, even if it responds no food, after that it has to respond to get the food. So, now that is a fixed interval presentation. On the other hand, in a similar manner as that of the variable ratio, we can also do something called as a variable interval. In this case, we are actually varying the interval about a mean, right. So, you are taking a distribution of random numbers about this tau, and in this first instance you are having the food ready or the reinforcement ready in an interval that is t plus some delta t or plus or minus delta t, and so on and so forth. Now, that is a variable interval presentation. Now, apart from giving names, do these different scheduling paradigms matter? Clearly, if they were not to have any effect, we would not be discussing it, and in fact it had so much profound effect that, as I told you, Skinner had to come up with this book of schedules of reinforcement. It is an entire book, very well written, just describing about the schedules of reinforcement between Forster and Skinner. With this, we will stop here in this lecture. Thank you, and we will continue in the next lecture on the effects of this different scheduling, and then venture into asking the question that we started on: do they learn in a cognitive manner or in a reflexive manner?